Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Now, in continuation of the concept of securitization, we are going to discuss something very interesting in this class that will be about securitization instruments, focusing on two very important variants of securitization instruments. One could be the pass-through certificates and the other one is pay-through securities. Many students, they get this kind of confusion as in how to distinguish between the two, what exactly are the characteristics of the two, and therefore this video is in the follow-up of the securitization process. So I'm sure you would have watched my video on the securitization process. In case you have missed out, find the link of that video in the description box given below, and from that you understand the whole process of securitization. In fact, you should always know the process of securitization and then watch this particular video as a follow-up. So here we are talking about securitization instruments. Now these two typical types of securities, what we call as pass-through certificates and pay-through securities. Both of these are securities issued by the special purpose entity or SPV, special purpose vehicle. In the process of securitization, if you can just recollect what we have learned, there is an originator who could be a bank or finance company which has a big asset pool which will be receivables. This could be loan receivables or mortgage receivables, whatever. This entire asset pool is transferred by the originator to the SPE, that is special purpose entity, or you can call it SPV, that is special purpose vehicle. This SPE is going to issue securities at the backing of this asset pool, which could be simply an asset pool or it could be even a mortgage pool. Now the securities issued by the SPV can be classified into these two types, that is what we call as pass-through certificates and pay-through securities. I want you to focus on these two terms, that is pass through and pay through. When I say pass through, means I am just acting as an intermediary. Whatever comes in my hand, I pass it to you because you are the investor. You have invested in that asset pool, or I would say you have invested in the securities which are backed by that asset pool. So I am just a service provider. Whatever money collected from that security by way of the interest or coupon payments or any kind of principal recoveries, I am going to utilize that money to pay you off. You are the investors. So what is happening in the process of securitization? In the backing of this asset pool or mortgage pool, the SPE has issued securities. If these securities are pass-through certificates, then whatever comes in the hands of the SPE by the way of interest and principal recovery, that whole thing as it is will be passed to the investors. That is why it is called pass through. So whatever payments are coming are passing through the special purpose vehicle. Special purpose vehicle is not restructuring them. That is what we call as pass through. So imagine if there are any prepayments made by the borrowers, then the SPE will also have to make prepayments to the investors, and therefore investors are at big risk when it is a pass-through certificate into the scene. So let me give you some important note on this. First of all, under the heading securitization instruments, you may want to write, in the process of securitization, when a pool of financial assets like home loans, auto loans, credit card receivables is securitized, the special purpose vehicle, that is SPV, issues financial instruments to investors backed by the cash flows from these assets. Two key types of such instruments are pass-through certificates, that is PTCs, and pay-through securities, that is PTSs. Though they sound similar, but they differ significantly in terms of structure, cash flow handling, risk and investor appeal. Alright, now moving ahead, we would say what exactly are pass-through certificates, PTCs. A pass-through certificate is a simple structure in which the SPV collects cash flows from the underlying pool of assets and passes them directly to the investors. There is no modification or restructuring in timing or nature of payments. So the SPV acts like a pipeline. As and when cash flows are received from borrowers, they are immediately passed on to the investors. All investors share proportionate rights in the underlying pool. The maturity of PTC is aligned with the maturity of underlying loans. Now, before you write up this whole thing, let me provide an important explanation to this. See, these are pass-through certificates. Pass-through. As and when the cash is recovered from the asset pool, the SPV will simply pass on that cash to the investors. So keep one thing in mind. Investors have invested in bonds or securities which are backed by an asset pool. That asset pool is going to be recovered in the form of cash over a period of time, and that cash will be collected in the form of interest and principal repayments. So there may be sometimes delays in these payments, and sometimes there may be prepayments, all depending upon the execution by the ultimate borrowers. Now what happens to the investors? If investors have an arrangement with SPV that whatever securities they are holding, these are pass-through certificates, then SPV is not taking any responsibility. They have made it as a simple structure. Mind it, the other one is a little complex structure, and when I explain to you what it is, you will understand why it is complex. But this simple structure is putting burden upon the investors. So sometimes investors would invest their money with a defined timeline of recovering back, but the defined timeline will be crashed completely, it will be crunched completely. There will be no definition of that specified timeline because these are pass-through certificates. As and when the money is recovered from the borrowers, that is ultimate borrowers, which are the parties who have to make payments of interest and principal repayment towards that asset pool, as and when the monies are recovered by SPV, the amounts will be passed through the SPV to the investors. SPV is not going to retain anything other than its costs. Now, these payments will be passed through SPV and directly going in the hands of the investor. So what is the role of SPV over here? It is acting as a pipeline. So as if a transparent pipeline, you can see how the flow is going, and what flow comes in the hands of SPV, same thing goes in the hands of investors. Now, this definitely will create some risk in the hands of investors, particularly when there are prepayments made and when there are delays in payments. So if there are prepayments, many borrowers would want to prepay. This happens in the scenarios of declining interest rates. For example, originally when those borrowers have taken loans, say the interest rate prevailing in the market was 10%. They are now paying interest at the rate of 10%. However, in the current scenario, suppose the interest rates have declined to 8%, these borrowers will be offered by multiple finance companies that you switch over your borrowings to us, we will offer you 8% interest. Or maybe the same borrowing can be rearranged or restructured at a lower rate by some other finance company. In other words, what will happen? There is a possibility of prepayments made by these borrowers. When these prepayments are happening, what SPV will do, because the prepayments are happening, it will start making prepayments of its securities as well. That means the investors who are the security holders or bond holders, they are getting their money back before time. This could be a scenario of prepayment. Imagine another scenario where there is a post payment or postponement in the payment or delay in payments, or in the worst scenario I would say even defaults in payments. What happens? Because it is a pass-through certificate, whatever is coming in will go in the hands of investors. What is coming in, if it comes late, investors will get their money late. If it comes lesser amount, investors will get lesser amount. If it doesn't come at all, investors won't get anything at all. So when it is a prepayment happening, the investors are getting money earlier than they expect. This is called a prepayment risk. Whereas when delays happen, the extended period will be experienced by the investors. So instead of say a tenure of 5 years, they may be recovering their monies over a period of 7 years. There is an extension in this period of recovery. There may be an extended risk or extension risk that is attributed to such securities. There may be even risk of default, that is a credit risk. The backing of the asset pool, suppose it starts making default, the SPV will also make defaults in the repayment of their securities, and ultimately investors will be the one who will suffer. So pass-through certificates, SPV is playing a dormant role, whereas investors are taking major chunk of risk. That is why the structure is very simple. What comes in goes. So I am just, as an SPV, I am just a caretaker of money coming in and money moving out. I am not getting involved into anything else. So I am sure this part of the note you would have written already. Now moving ahead and now talking about an example. If borrowers in a home loan pool starts repaying early, that is prepay their loans, the SPV forwards those payments to investors immediately. The investors get repaid earlier than expected but lose future interest income. This is called prepayment risk. Best suited for institutional investors who can handle variability in cash flows, high transparency and low structuring cost. Investors need to be aware of cash flow uncertainty. So please make sure that you are clear with these points, and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, so let's move ahead and now talk about other way scenario. If the borrowers make delay in their payments, the investors receive late, the maturity of PTC gets extended, investors don't receive their money when anticipated. This is called extension risk. If the borrowers make default in their payments, since PTCs are passed through, if loans default, SPV has no liability, investors bear the actual loss from defaults. Some protection may be provided via credit enhancements like excess spread, over collateralization or guarantees, but still risk is present. This is called credit risk. Alright friends, once you have completed this, let us move ahead and now we talk about the other securities which are pay through securities. So let me first explain this whole thing and then I'll give you the required notes. Pay through, that means the SPV is going to make payments to the investors through the money collected by it from the asset pool. So asset pool will be giving amounts in the hands of SPV by way of interest and principal repayments. Here also there may be delays, there may be defaults, here also there may be prepayments, but all these cash flows will be simply utilized to pay off the investors based on the timeline committed to them. Now here the prepayment risk or the extension risk is not to be passed on to the investors. So the asset pool is just a means or a source of payment. Backing is of that asset pool, but it is not pass through type, it is pay through type. If it is a pay through type, it is just utilized as a source. Now here, to overcome this kind of uncertain situation, what SPV does, it creates various time tranches. Now I have explained to you about tranches in the process of securitization itself. So let me give you another example where time tranches can be created. So assume that the overall time length of the asset pool is say around 10 years, but certain loans will be maturing in 3 years time, certain loans will be maturing in 5 years time, and then the remainder loans will be maturing over a period of 10 years. So what happens, the SPV is going to structure the securitization process in a way that it will create 3 time tranches, say 3 years bond, there is bonds maturing in 3 years time, 5 years bond, there is bonds maturing in 5 years time, and then 10 years bond maturing in 10 years time. Now what happens? When the monies are collected by the SPE, it is going to first pay off the 3-year bond, then 5-year bond, and at the end 10-year bond. So there may be prepayments here also, but if there are enough prepayments over a period of 3 years, which is amount collected in excess of what was to be paid back to the investors for a 3-year bond, the amount cannot be given back to the other investors. The amount will be staying with the SPV. SPV will have to reinvest that money temporarily and create the cumulative value in the asset pool. Now that money also can be utilized ahead. That means when you have any excess cash flow, you are not supposed to pass it on directly to the investors. You need to, as an SPV, you need to reinvest that money and wait for the right time, then only the amount can be passed on to the investors. This entire arrangement will require existence of time tranches, and the whole asset pool, the cash flow pattern, everything has to be controlled and managed very well by the SPV. SPV gets more actively involved in this arrangement, what we call as pay through securities. So in PTSs, the involvement of SPE as at a high level can be experienced. So let us write something about this as well. So under the heading pay through securities, we will say a pay through security is a structured financial instrument where the SPV repackages the cash flows from the underlying assets and issues securities with customized features like fixed maturities, fixed payment dates, and different seniority levels. This allows more control and flexibility in how and when payments are made to investors. SPV collects irregular borrower payments. SPV reinvests or reallocates cash flows temporarily. Investors receive payment on fixed dates as per defined tranches. Alright friends, let us move ahead, and as an example, let us observe this. If borrowers in a home loan pool starts repaying early, that is prepay their loans, the SPV collects all those irregular cash flows and uses them to pay only the amount due to investors based on the predefined timeline for each time tranche. Any excess cash can be reinvested temporarily by the SPV before disbursing. Appeals to investors needing predictable cash flows, enables structuring multiple products from a single pool, higher structural complexity for the SPV but lower risk for investors due to the scheduled and predictable cash flows. Alright, now moving forward, and we talk about the key differences, that is PTCs versus PTSs. So if you want to understand the key differences, whatever discussions we have made, try to recollect. So PTCs directly pass all cash to the investors, keeping it simple, and PTSs, that is pay through securities, restructure them, making the whole process a little more complex. So that simplicity and complexity is for whom? For the SPV. So pass through is simple for SPV, whereas pay through is complex for SPV. But what about investors? Investors do not take risk in case of pay through, but they take high degree of risk in case of pass through. So PTCs expose investors to time and prepayment risk. PTS on the other side provide predictable cash flows, putting no risk to the investors. PTCs suit whom? These suit investors who can tolerate cash flow variability, means who are not very peculiar about when they will be receiving back their money. They are okay with receiving variable payments. PTS suits those investors who need fixed schedules for making payments. PTCs have single maturity structure generally, and PTS can have multiple tranches. In fact, PTS need to have multiple tranches because PTC being a simple structure, as and when money comes, it will be passed through. So they don't have to make time tranches, whereas in case of PTS, time tranches become an important activity. So SPV in PTC is passive, that is in pass-through certificates the role of SPE is more of passive, whereas it is highly active in case of Pay Through Securities. Alright, now moving ahead and understanding just the final summary, we can beautifully narrate this as, understand, pass-through certificates appear as a transparent pipeline, correct? A transparent pipeline, you can see the water flowing. That way you can see what is flowing in the hands of the SPE, and same thing will come in the hands of investors, transparent. On the other side, imagine a pay-through security as a water tank where the monies are pumped in, which stays stored over there, and only that much money will flow out and go in the hands of investors as and when and how much ever needed. So let us write up this beautiful summary over here. PTCs are like transparent pipes, what comes in goes out. PTSs are like water tanks with outlets, what comes in can be stored, scheduled and released as needed. Write up this whole thing in case you want, and that will be end of the session. Thank you very much for attending this class.